Welcome, it is Mitch. I am on YouTube. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel as we try to build this thing up. Packers bye week thoughts. We're going through it today. I didn't have a recap for the Lions game on Sunday. I was at the game and then wasn't back here immediately following it. And, you don't do recaps for Sunday's games in the middle of the following week. Our news cycle, even in sports, moves way too fast, so that would be old news at this point. Although I think when we kind of encapsulate everything into the bye week thoughts video here today, some of the things that happened in that game against Detroit on Sunday stood out for me as things that could affect Green Bay moving forward, coming off of the off week and moving forward through the rest of the regular season, things that certainly still need fixing or touching up on for Matt LaFleur and the squad the rest of the way. I want to preface this, though, by saying, Green Bay is 6-3. Last year, through 9 games, they were 3-6. So obviously, wins, losses, they're in a far better spot. On the injury front, guys are nicked up on every team. Green Bay, I would say, fortunately, doesn't seem to have too many major injuries. Luke Musgrave had surgery on injured reserve. Hopefully comes back later in the year. The rookie Marshawn Lloyd out of USC, still haven't seen him, but he's expected to be on the active roster sooner rather than later. Could be emerging from the bye week and back on the active roster for that Chicago game. But Green Bay's in a good spot to make a run towards the postseason, and then you would hope onward from there. So I want to preface by saying that because what I'm going to kind of dissect and go through in this video is it's not to inflict panic in any sense. I am viewing this through the lens for Green Bay that if you want to win a championship this year, here's what needs to improve and improve fast, because 6-3, you'll take it. I think had you told the Packers they could be 6-3 through 9 games going into the bye, they would have signed up for that. Now, had you told them 2 of the 3 losses were at home to NFC North rivals Minnesota, Detroit, maybe a little bit more skeptical. But all in all, 6 wins in 9 games, I think they sign up for that entering the bye week, and knowing that the roster health-wise is in a pretty good shape with the week off before you head to Chicago. So some of these things we're going to break down and talk about. I'm not trying to inch you closer to the panic button at all. It's just some of it's a harsh reality for Green Bay and things that need to be figured out and need to be figured out fast. And there were a couple of things in the game against the Lions on Sunday that I would say worried me at least a little bit from Green Bay's perspective. The first was the manner in which Detroit played the game. Went back and watched that game, and then went back and watched just Detroit's plays on offense a second time. And one thing really startled me, and that was that the Lions, and you'd have to ask them, and maybe the weather had some part in it, but to me the Lions played that game as if they were waiting for Green Bay to mess up, thought Green Bay would mess up to a degree that Detroit didn't need to take too many risks to come out with a win. And that to me is worrisome. That they thought Green Bay, just based off how I saw the offense play, it struck me as a team that was like, we don't need to be at our best. We don't need to empty the chamber to come out with a win here because we think they'll make enough mistakes for us and we'll be fine. That's how I took some of the possessions, drives, decisions from Detroit's offense. How many shots downfield did the Lions take? And I get the rain plays a big factor in that, the wind, so on and so forth. But Detroit did not take too many risks on offense in that game. Yeah, they went for it on a 4th and 1. They went for it on their opening drive on a 4th down at like the 2.5 yard line and scored a touchdown. I get that. Those are typical Detroit things. They did not make many big risks. They did not make many big throws or attempts down the field. Goff threw for less than 150 yards, and it was more than enough to win. The final score, 24-14, to me was not indicative of really how dominant the Lions were in that game. To me, that really felt more of like a 34-10 kind of beatdown start to finish from Detroit. And so Green Bay, to me, is usually in the spot that Detroit was in on Sunday, where I have looked at Packer games in recent years, whether it's, Love's first year as a starter last year when he started to figure it out, or the prime years with Aaron Rodgers, obviously. There were many a times with the Rodgers prime years where we would look at a game and say, man, if Green Bay just doesn't shoot itself in the foot, they're fine. They're going to win this game. And that's exactly how I thought the Lions played on Sunday. They were just waiting for Green Bay to slip up. and knew if they didn't, they'd have a good shot to win, and that's exactly what happened. And so it struck me watching Detroit's offense. And then on the flip side of the ball, the penalties for the Packers are so annoying. I mean, they seem to come at the most inopportune times, especially up front of the offensive line. If there's like a 3rd and 4, all of a sudden it's turned to a 3rd and 9 on a false start. There was one that drove me nuts a couple weeks ago. Josh Jacobs on a 3rd down had a long run on the opening drive for Green Bay, deep into Jacksonville territory. He gets called back for a hold. The next play then is 3rd and long. Love throws an incomplete pass, but even if it was completed, there was another hold on Green Bay, and we're seeing those things stack up. The numbers reflect it for Green Bay. They're 24th in the NFL with 7.3 penalties per game. They seem to come at killer times. They had 10 against Detroit. Here is my concern with the penalties for Green Bay. We keep hearing from the coaching staff, it's not just LaFleur, when they do their weekly press conferences and the penalty problem is brought up, we keep hearing how it's fixable, how it needs to just be cleaned up a little bit. At what point do we just say, hey, this might just be a team that's more prone to penalties in making some of those head-scratching ones that draws the ref to throw the laundry on the field? Because I feel like we've been hearing for weeks now that, oh, this is coachable, it's fixable, we'll get it cleaned up. Yet you had 10 against Detroit. And it wasn't much better a couple weeks ago when you edged out Jacksonville on the road. There were still killer penalties. And so I'm wondering, as we are now over the halfway point, and penalties have plagued Green Bay going back to early parts in the season, even in wins, what point do we look at and just say, you know what? This is just part of their identity. You know, you're going to have good, you're going to have bad. This is one of the not-so-great things. That Green Bay might just be a penalty-prone team. Because when we hear every week like, oh, it needs to be cleaned up, it needs to be fixed, it's coachable, things like that, but we're not seeing the problem slowly but surely go away. It's staying constant. They had 10 for 65, I think it was, against the Lions on Sunday. That's a concern I have with the penalties, primarily on the offensive side of the ball. Do we get to a point where it's like this team just can't shake loose of that? They just get penalties more than the average team in the NFL, 24th in the National Football League in penalties with 7.3 per game. And then the other element of the offense, I mentioned Detroit seemed like they were just waiting for Green Bay to make mistakes. And this has been harped on by just about everyone. The Jordan Love interceptions. I said a couple weeks ago, I can live with interceptions. I can't live with the ones that when they happen, you're like, what on earth was the thought process? What was going into the decision-making on that throw? And there was one of those against Detroit. You know what I'm talking about. It's 10-3, less than a minute left till half. And Love goes to check it down to Josh Jacobs, doesn't see Kirby Joseph, the safety, throws it right to his lap. Kirby Joseph waltzes the other way for 6 points. Green Bay's offense went onto that field, and you don't have to say it if you're Matt LaFleur. You shouldn't have to say it to your quarterback and to your offense. But worst case scenario in that spot was you're down 10-3 at half. And Love throws one of those boneheaded interceptions, and it gets taken all the way back, and all of a sudden it's, oh, now we're down 17-3 going into the break, and it's such a deflating play. He's had at least one interception in every game he started this year. It was a problem for him. I believe it was his last year at Utah State, primarily with the interceptions, although I kind of took that with a grain of salt as a guy who didn't have much around him on the offense at Utah State in his final year, and he was trying to, at times, it looked like do things or carry the burden of the offense on his shoulders completely. So I kind of shook it off as, I don't know if he'll have those interception problems in Green Bay. Again, I go back to his first year as a starter as a reference point for why the interceptions this year worry me. Because last year, first year as a starter, first half, he threw plenty of them. In Jordan Love's last 8 games in the regular season a year ago, he had 1 pick. His last 8 games, he had 1 pick. He has 10 in 7 games this year, and at least 1 in every single game he started. What happened? Why are we regressing back to what we saw in the first half of his first year as a starter last season? I did not watch him throw 1 pick in the final 8 weeks of the regular season a year ago and think, all would be fine and dandy moving forward, that he'd never throw interceptions, that he'd have a TD to interception ratio of Aaron Rodgers, because Aaron Rodgers is on the extreme end of the scale of a quarterback who never threw picks and always threw touchdowns. I did not have those expectations for Jordan Love. I don't think many of you did either. That would have been foolish. But to see him throw 1 in the last 8 games last season and now have 10 in 7 starts this year, what happened? Why are we regressing and going the other direction? If through the first 8-9 games this year he had 5 or 6, you could say, well, it's technically a regression because he only had 1 in the final 8 games. I wouldn't be nitpicking like that. It's the interceptions like the one we saw against Detroit where it cost you 6 points in the snap of a finger, in the blink of an eye, and the one where you didn't even need to go back and watch it, but I did anyways when I rewatched the game, and I'm like, what is he possible? He said he didn't see the safety, but if that's the case, fine, I can't really dispute it, but there have been interceptions this year where he tries to thread the needle and he's had to see a deep safety, he's had to see a corner underneath, and you're wondering what is going through his mind outside of, is he just thinking he could be Superman in certain spots? And I love the abundant amount of confidence he has in his right arm, but you do have to pick your spots at times. And that interception against Detroit on Sunday is just one of those unacceptable ones. And I'm wondering what happened from the second half of last year to the first half of this year where we're seeing a regression with a ton of interceptions, because it's not just a few. It's not 4 or 5 in total, and you're like, whatever, all these quarterbacks are throwing interceptions, right? It's 10. He's tied for the lead in the NFL with Geno Smith with 10 interceptions, and he hasn't even played in 2.5 games. Malik Willis started against Indianapolis and Tennessee, and he had to leave the Jacksonville game early as well. I think, and maybe this is me putting my blinders on, I shouldn't say I think. I want to believe Jordan Love will get this figured out, along with Matt LaFleur, Adam Stenavich, and the rest of the offensive coaching staff, that this won't be something that's just going to plague Love moving forward throughout his career, that they can tone it down a little bit. Because, again, I can live with interceptions. I can't live with the dumb ones. I can't live with the ones that make you want to pull your hair out because, again, it has you wondering what was he even possibly seeing. So, again, I'm not trying to inflict panic. I'm just merely pointing out Green Bay 6-3 at the bye. Postseason still well within the frame, well within the view, but there are things to clean up, things to work on, and I wonder how many of them are fixable, like with the penalties primarily. Is that something that we're actually going to see get cleaned up in the second half, or is this just a team that's prone to penalties this year, that they can't ever shake that off? It is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Appreciate all the support as we build the channel up, going through Packer bye-week thoughts. I had a video come out the other day about Preston Smith being traded. We have since found out from Preston Smith himself, talking to reporters in Pittsburgh, he asked for a trade a couple weeks ago. Green Bay pretty much granted that wish, trading him to the Steelers. He didn't think it was a good scheme fit with Jeff Hafley's 4-3, so now he goes back to a 3-4 in Pittsburgh. I was not up in arms angry that they traded Preston Smith. I was a bit perturbed that, yes, it was a guy who only had 2.5 sacks. Yes, it was a guy whose snap count totals were dwindling in recent weeks, and maybe now we know why. It's because he, silently had requested a trade. Well, silently to us, but voiced it to the front office of Green Bay. Perhaps the coaches that he was requesting a trade from the Packers, and that's why he saw his snap count totals go down. But I thought for an area for Green Bay that's struggling mightily, why give away a potential option? But now we know he requested the trade. So I have to change up a little bit on my stance on that. It changes the dynamic of that deal. In Green Bay ended up Goody primarily doing right by Preston Smith for a veteran who wanted a fresh start somewhere else in a scheme he was more familiar with. Put the Preston Smith trade aside for a second. I am not one who typically says this with Green Bay. I would not have said it last year when they were 3-6 through 9 games. They've traded Rasul Douglas. I loved Rasul Douglas. I was fine with them trading him. They got a decent draft pick back. And at that point in time, I did not think Green Bay was going to turn their season around the way they did and march into wild card weekend, beat the crap out of Dallas, go to the divisional round against San Francisco, and get edged out late. So I was fine with them. They won't ever say it, but playing the role of seller last year and trading Rasul Douglas. Certainly they are not sellers this time around. But why not? I know it has to match up and it has to be a fit, and you don't want to give away the treasure chest of picks or feel like you're giving up too much, but why not take that swing one time for a team who, yes, just struggled against Detroit, and I believe Detroit's a tier ahead of everyone else in the NFC right now, including Green Bay. I truly do. Detroit, to me, I know they have one loss and Kansas City's undefeated. I think the Lions might be the best team in football right now. But if you're Green Bay, why not take just one swing one time? I know it's not typically in their DNA. I think what irritates me more isn't necessarily that Green Bay didn't take a swing, but when Preston Smith was traded, I saw way too many people celebrating like the cap savings that it would have for Green Bay for the next 2 years. I'll be completely honest. I'll worry about Green Bay's cap situation, like as a fan for myself. Like Green Bay always has to be cognizant of it, and I understand that. But as a fan, I'll worry and look at the cap situation this offseason. Right now, we're laser focused on this season. And so when I saw people on social media like celebrating, not that Preston Smith was gone, but what it did for cap savings for Green Bay, I was like, why are we celebrating what this means for Green Bay's 2025 and 2026 salary cap as a whole when this team's 6-3 and trying to grind away? The division isn't out of reach now, but grind away to get to the postseason. I didn't like seeing that angle of it, where there were so many people and content creators, like Packers content creators, who are like, yeah, look at what this does for the 2025 salary cap in 2026. I get it, and I get that it does help. And Preston was 31 years old, and he was aging, and his numbers were dwindling. I can't sit here and act all chipper and happy about what that trade did for the future salary cap for the next 2 years when I want this team to look at making a move that can put them over the top for this year. And I know it's not typically in Green Bay's DNA to do that at the trade deadline. And I think they're trying to thread the needle. And I know Preston requested the trade, but you're trading away a veteran presence, a veteran voice in that locker room. I know the production on the field had dwindled, but you're trading that away and not trading for anything at the deadline and still hoping that this team can get to the mountaintop. And I'm seeing Washington take a swing at Marshawn Lattimore. They have a rookie quarterback in Jaden Daniels. I'm seeing Detroit lose Aiden Hutchinson and saying, okay, we're going to address it. Boom, here's Zadarius Smith. And is Zadarius Smith, an all-pro player at this point in his career? No. Is Marshawn Lattimore, does he have a friendly cap number after this year? No, but Washington could wiggle out of it if they want. Plus, they have Daniels on a rookie-scale quarterback deal. But I'm seeing teams like Washington take a swing, and they're having a tremendous year, but they're doing it with a rookie quarterback. And I know what Green Bay did at the deadline is typical for Green Bay. Like, believe me, I get that. Just one time, would it kill them to take a swing and try to get over the top? Because, to me, here's what you're relying on. I thought the two biggest needs that they could have addressed, or just address one of them, the pass rush, the lack of it, and the cornerback room. With Green Bay standing pat at the deadline and not adding, here is what they are relying on. They are relying on Jair Alexander to get healthy. He missed the game against Detroit, and to stay healthy the rest of the way. It's possible. It's hard to predict that stuff, but some players are more injury prone than others. In the last 3.5 seasons, Jair Alexander has missed 27 games. Again, the last 3.5 years, Jair Alexander has missed 27 games. He did not play in the game against the Lions going into the bye week due to an injury. And so you're relying on him to stay healthy, a player who has had trouble doing that the last few seasons. If he can't, you are now relying on a cornerback room of Eric Stokes, Carrington Valentine, and Keyshawn Nixon. And I love those guys. And could they step up and deliver? Sure. Is it overly likely that they would do that if they all have to elevate? If Eric Stokes all of a sudden is your CB1 or CB2, Valentine's moving up a notch, and Keyshawn maybe has to move back to the slot depending on Evan Williams' timetable, or maybe he's still on the outside. Do I like that matchup, and do I like forecasting what that could look like if you play Detroit in the playoffs again, and they have Jamison Williams this time, and they have Amon-Ra St. Brown, and they have Sam Laporta, and it's in a dome in Detroit? Not necessarily. So you're relying on a corner in Jair Alexander, who I love, but you're relying on him to stay healthy when he's proven the last few years it's not his fault. But it's been difficult for him to stay on the field. He's missed 27 games in 3.5 years. And then with the pass rush, you traded away a potential option. I know he requested it, but you traded away someone who could have been a partial solution to a big problem, and you're hoping now that the pass rush can just magically figure it out and step up after trading away another guy that could have been part of the mix to try to do so. And I love what this defense has been under Jeff Hafley. I love the opportunistic mindset. I love the aggressiveness. I love that they're racking up the takeaways. It has been a breath of fresh air. I am not trying to paint a picture that the defense is miserable, so on and so forth. I'm saying there were a couple things at the deadline that maybe could have been addressed, even though it isn't typical in Green Bay's nature to do so. And now you're, I don't want to say walking on eggshells, but do we really think the pass rush is just magically going to be turned around, or is that going to be an issue all year? Because that becomes a huge issue in the playoffs if you're giving a quarterback all sorts of time in the pocket, like a Jared Goff, to just sit back there and decipher and pick apart your defense, a defense that has been pretty good for Green Bay. You get a pass rush that gets home, quarterback has to make quicker decisions. Quicker decisions can lead to bad decisions. That's when your defense can capitalize. And I love what Jeff Hafley has done with this defense. The aggressiveness, the turnovers, not getting pushed around. I was sick and tired of seeing Green Bay defenses get pushed around and ran all over. I thought Detroit ran it fine against Green Bay on Sunday. They ran it pretty damn well, but it wasn't like demoralizing or embarrassing. I don't know if that shouldn't be the bar, but we have seen it time and again in past years with Green Bay defenses. And I love what they have. I love what they've done with Jeff Hafley, but there are areas to improve upon and areas where you're banking in on some things that just might not be there, primarily a pass rush that hasn't woken up outside of the game against Tennessee, really, and has been fairly quiet. And now you're looking at a guy down the list like Aaron Mosby or Brenton Cox, who will likely both see action with Preston Smith gone, and hoping that one of them, along with Enagbare, Van Ness, and Rashawn Gary, can figure it out. And I just don't know how likely that is. And there is a sense that you're just kind of praying that it gets sorted out. Because right now, to me, Detroit is the benchmark in the NFC. They're the cream of the crop. They're an obstacle that you likely have to get past in order to get to New Orleans in February. And to me, like I said earlier, they are on a different tier right now. And I saw some people, and this is fine, everyone can have an opinion. It's the great thing about all this, right? I saw some people look back at the game and come to conclusions that, you know, on Sunday, the penalties and the botched snaps, of which Green Bay, I believe, had 3 that I counted, like really, like snaps, and I know Josh Myers was out, but snaps right at Jordan Love's feet. He had a dive on him, so on and so forth. And I saw people look at the penalties, the bad snaps, the sloppy play by Green Bay, and a lot of people just pointed at the weather. And I looked at that and I said, then why didn't Detroit have the same problems? I don't remember one snap going back and watching the game and then going back and watching Detroit's offensive possessions again. I don't remember seeing one botched snap. I don't remember seeing too many penalties for Detroit outside of the Brian Branch one where it was like, it felt like a killer or just a really, really bad penalty, right? Where Green Bay had more than a couple of those. And so if the weather is your logic for why Green Bay was affected with penalties and the low snaps at Love's feet at times, why didn't affect Detroit? Detroit just a better product right now. Maybe it's as simple as that. I don't know. I don't think Detroit's unbeatable. I don't think they're untouchable. But I think 24-14 on Sunday was a lot farther apart than what the final score indicated. It doesn't mean Green Bay can't go to Detroit later in the year on a Thursday night and win. It doesn't mean Green Bay has no shot if they meet up with Detroit in the playoffs. There is plenty of room for improvement. I look at the NFC and I see a huge opportunity for Green Bay this year. Yes, I think San Francisco will dig themselves out of a slow 4-4 start, but I look around the rest of it, and I know people laugh at Dallas year in and year out, and they can't get it done in the playoffs, but Dallas is usually a playoff team. They're 2 games below 500. Dak Prescott's on injured reserve. Dallas, to me, is cooked at this point. Washington's having a good year. I love what they're becoming. Do I think Washington is a team that realistically can win the NFC this year? I do not. Philadelphia is hanging around. Right now, Arizona's leading the NFC West. They've been a great story. They're 5-4. If it holds up, do I think Arizona has a shot to win the NFC? No, I don't. I see weaknesses in this conference, and I see a Green Bay team that's 6-3 that is a really good product at times, but too sloppy at other junctures of the season. And even in some games where they can look really good for a quarter and a half, and then they have one quarter where you're like, why did that switch get flipped? And all of a sudden they're reverting back to some of these bad tendencies we've seen throughout the season. Even after the loss to Detroit, and I know Minnesota's playing good football and they rebounded with a win over Indianapolis, I still look at the NFC and I would say the top two teams are Detroit and Green Bay. And I think there's a real opportunity for the Packers, and that's why I'm harping on some of these issues today. It's not to scare you into thinking Green Bay's toast. It's kind of meant to be the opposite. Like, I'm wondering aloud with you, how much of this is fixable? Jordan Love's interceptions, the dumb ones, these penalties, the lack of the pass rush. I don't think that part's fixable. I think that's what you got this year. The health of Jair Alexander is going to be huge coming down the stretch for Green Bay because of what's behind him at the cornerback spot, as they chose not to add to that department at the trade deadline. Green Bay's 8th in DVOA on offense. They're 13th on defense. I believe they're 8th overall in the NFL. That would tell you it's a pretty damn good football team. But it's a pretty damn good football team that still has stuff to figure out. And there aren't just small margins that can be improved upon at the bye week. And I think when you look at a lot of the numbers that would indicate, like the DVOA on offense and defense, that, hey, this is a pretty good football team. But yet there's a lot that can be improved upon. You know, if Green Bay was 6-3 going into the bye and we felt like this was a finished product and like, hey, this is as good as it's going to get, they're playing so damn good, I don't know where else they can improve, but they just lost to Detroit, I'd be way more worried. I see room for improvement in a lot of areas, yet statistically this is still a pretty good football team when you look at some of the analytics. That's my reason for optimism with this group. But the bye week, I think, is coming at a good time. I don't know the order of operations as far as like what I expect to see get cleaned up the quickest. I would hope it's the interceptions and the penalties because, again, I don't know how you fix this pass rush. You just traded away a guy who wasn't really contributing but could have contributed something even though he asked for the trade. So now you're really relying on young guys who haven't really gotten many snaps, primarily talking about Mosby and Cox. And then you're hoping Lucas Van Ness wakes up because he's been invisible at times this year. The pass rush really, really does. It's something I circle as a concern point going forward for Green Bay the rest of the season. But who knows? 6-3 at the bye, you come out of it, you get Chicago. And I know Chicago, that's a team that you're wondering if they're giving up on their head coach because there were some really glaring, weird plays in that game against Arizona. Even the week before that against Washington when they lost on the Hail Mary as time expired. You know, coming out of the bye, though, as good as you as a Packer fan, and I'm assuming most people watching this are Packer fans, as good as you feel about that game coming out of the bye against Chicago, just know that even though Chicago didn't show up against Arizona, they will try their damnedest to show up against Green Bay. They typically do, even though Green Bay's never lost to the Bears with Matt LaFleur as the head coach. I'm not one of those jerks that says, like, oh, this is Chicago's Super Bowl. But if Chicago can spoil the party for Green Bay in any capacity this year, if they keep falling out of the race, that would be a good consolation prize for them. It truly would. And so I wouldn't expect the team in Chicago that we saw in Arizona this past week to be the team that the Packers see coming out of the bye week. That's a game that they'll load up for and that they'll try, everything in their power to try to win because you might not want to believe it, but the Bears season isn't done. It's definitely trending towards that direction, but I think they have New England this week, and I would assume they win that. It's at home in Chicago, and then who knows? Then they try to get back on the right track. But bye week comes at a good time for Green Bay. A lot of things to clean up on. Part of me wishes they would have taken a swing at the deadline, even though I didn't expect it. It's kind of just the Green Bay way. It typically doesn't happen. So we'll see what happens coming out of the bye week, but I do feel good about where they're at and the fact that there is so much room for improvement. And I feel even better looking around the landscape of the NFC and seeing that outside of Detroit, you could still make a case Green Bay is the second best in the conference right now. And it's a team that last year we saw them lose to Detroit at home early in the season. They rebounded and beat the crap out of the Lions in a November game on a Thursday against Detroit when it seemed like Detroit was really firing away at that point in the year too. So we'll see what it looks like coming out of the bye week. I'll have more videos throughout the week as well. We'll break down some other things, but wanted to get some just basic bye week thoughts out of the way for the Packers. Feel good about where they're at. Got to improve some areas. Not real small on the margins either. Like the interceptions have been alarming. The penalties, 24th in the NFL. Get those cleaned up. See where you're at on the offensive side of the ball. It is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. Appreciate all the support as always. We'll see you next time.